Good afternoon and welcome to Ballots and Bagels, Conversations with Trusted Election Sources, a series from the German Marshall Fund's Alliance for Securing Democracy, where we'll discuss the security of U.S. elections in the lead up to the 2022 midterms with the people who helped protect them. My name is David Levine, and I'm the Elections Integrity Fellow at the Alliance for Securing Democracy, a bagel maven and your host. For today's fourth episode, I'd like to welcome Mesa County, Colorado Director of Elections, Brandi Bantz, to discuss Colorado's June 28th primary. Brandi, did I get your name right? Did I pronounce that correctly? Perfect. Ms. Bantz has over 16 years of experience administering Colorado elections in at least 3 different counties that I'm aware of. She has served as the Director of Elections in Mesa County since May of 2020 and has received both national and local recognition for her service. She holds a certified elections and voter registration administrative certificate from Auburn University in the Election Center. And in May of this year, she was also appointed as the designated election official for Mesa County after a judge removed Tina Peters as a designated election official and granted the request to recruit Bantz as the DEO. Former Colorado Secretary of State Wayne Williams has even previously stated that he was willing to take on the extra duty of assisting with Mesa County elections, in large part because of Brandi's previous experience working with him. Colorado has a well-deserved reputation for being one of the safest states to cast a vote, a reputation cemented by its myriad of safeguards, including paper ballots, ballot signature verification processes, and robust post-election audits. That said, as the June primary approached, Colorado also found itself at the forefront of misinformation and sabotage efforts by election deniers and other bad actors, including in Mesa County. In at least a few instances, Colorado local election officials have been investigated for allowing improper access to election materials and or sharing election information with unauthorized people. And in Mesa County, state officials had to decertify the county's voting equipment after the Mesa County clerk allegedly provided unauthorized access to it, a breach that led to a public release of sensitive information. As of July 3rd, the state, Colorado, has forwarded more than 500 threats against election officials, election workers, to the Federal Election Threats Task Force since it was convened by the U.S. Department of Justice about a year ago. Election day in Mesa County was no walk in the park, but the results were secure and accurate. And I look forward to discussing this, bagels, and more with Mesa County Elections Director Brandi Bantz. Brandi, thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me here.
The pleasure's all mine. Brandi, let's jump right in. Countless election officials that I've spoken with have noted the sharp contrast between conducting elections now and before the 2020 election cycle. But your experiences are perhaps more dramatic than anyone I have spoken with. When you joined Mesa County in 2020, most of the election staff, as I understand it, was pretty inexperienced, frankly, because many of the previous staff had left. In August of 2021, as I had mentioned or alluded to, the Colorado Secretary of State decertified Mesa County's voting equipment, and this decertification forced Mesa County to obtain alternative election equipment in a very short time frame for the November 2021 election. And more recently, the Mesa County District Attorney released a report finding no outside interference in the 2020 and 2021 elections, as had been claimed by conspiracy theorists. And of course, even more recently than that, arguably, a judge found, right, that a number of senior officials could not perform the functions of the designated election official position, a position that you now hold. That you probably have experienced more in 2 years than I experienced in my 10 plus years administering elections across the country. So I think that's a pretty decent feat. I'm wondering if you can first tell our listeners a bit about your initial motivation for becoming an election official. And frankly, given the microscope Mesa County has been under since 2020, can you tell us what actions you and your election colleagues have been taking to help ensure confidence in Mesa County elections during these challenging times?
Absolutely. So when I started my career, I started in a small county in Teller County, and I was an administrative assistant. And one of my duties was doing voter registration. So that's how all of this began. I had no idea that I would be here where I am today as the designated election official, but I'm happy that I've took this journey. I've learned over the years and been able to experience all the changes in the laws, the changes in processes and procedures that has led Colorado to where it is today. And I can confidently say that we do have the most secure and accurate elections, and I'm proud to be a part of it. Over the years, we've implemented additional security procedures, chain of custodies. You do lessons learned each election. So you talk with your team and your election judges and find out what worked, what didn't work, what is a possible threat or security issue that could take place. And you put in processes to prevent that from happening. So anything that is a possibility, we try to be ahead of that and put those processes in place to ensure that nothing happens that would give voters question to the election results.
And Brandi, just to follow up on that, because I think that's a really important point that you just raised. I mean, I think that for a lot of election officials and for a lot of the public, there's been a lot of talk, frankly, about how to counter and deal with external threats. But I think one of the things that's becoming, an emerging concern across much of the country is how to deal with potential threats internally. I'm curious, right, particularly in your time at Mesa County, what processes and procedures you've put in place to deal with that kind of threat? Because I know that this is something that an increasing number of election officials are speaking to me about as they've prepared for their 2022 elections.
There are some changes that happened with Secretary of State rules. There were processes that were previously in place in Mesa County as well. And then just election rules got further defined. So there's no questions about what you have to do to secure your elections. So our cameras run 24 hours a day in our back secure areas that hold all of our election equipment and where the ballots would be processed. We also implemented a buddy system here in Mesa County, so there is not one election official in the back by themselves. So even though that's not required by law, we take two of us back there just to give people that added sense of security that not one person's back there touching election equipment by themselves. We do have card swipe access into all of our secure rooms where we use badges that are associated with our names. So it shows when we enter rooms and when we exit the rooms. So there's a lot of different processes in place to have that chain to see who was where and when.
Oh, no, that's absolutely right. And of course, even though the buddy system may not be right, Colorado law, that of course is a best practice, right? Obviously from CISA's Insider Threat Mitigation Guide. And some of those other changes that you alluded to, a couple of them are part of that recent election security package that was signed, right, but passed by the Colorado legislature, signed by the governor recently. That of course came on top of a number of the internal changes you alluded to before. Can you tell our listeners what sorts of preparations that you've been making to help ensure the security of Mesa County election systems, particularly, right? Since you assumed the DEO role.
Yeah, I think when this whole situation happened here in Mesa County, the Secretary of State implemented some new conditions of use, some additional conditions of use. So we have a document here in Colorado that says these are the rules. If you're going to use voting equipment, election equipment, these are the rules that you have to follow. So no connectivity to the internet. So you have to make sure that there's an air gap and you have to verify that. It did say that video cameras had to be on for a certain period of time, but now it's 24/7. And in the past in Mesa County, that was the process that was in place, is that surveillance camera just ran 24/7 anyways. It gives that ability for anybody to take a look at that footage to make sure that nothing has taken place. So that will continue on. We also, in those condition of use, have seals that actually go on the cases of our computers, so we could verify if anybody opened that to access the actual computer itself. So all these different chain of custodies, video surveillance, access logs, that just helps tighten up the security, and it would identify if somebody was where they were not supposed to be.
I think that's a really good point. I know that, one of the things that I know firsthand is that, right, if you have the paper ballot piece, you have the robust post-election audit piece, you have the chain of custody protocols, it goes a long way toward alleviating actual concerns that folks have. Notwithstanding some of those changes that you talked about that you and your colleagues did in the run-up to the June primary. I know that a concern that existed across Colorado were violent threats, right? Violent threats from voters accusing different election officers of being complicit in disrupting election results, and threats, frankly, arising in part out of unfounded allegations about voter fraud. Matt Crane, who I know you know, the executive director of the Colorado County Clerks Association, said shortly before the primary, and I quote, "We are preparing for June 29, 2022 to be worse than November 4th, 2020. Because if we have some of these candidates lose, or if they're losing at the time, the claims of fraud and all of the garbage is just going to be amplified even more." Crane, of course, said this out of concerns for election critics like Mesa County Clerk Tina Peters. And in response to these sorts of concerns, we saw reporting on local Colorado election officials right across the state that took drastic measures. Right, at least one I know of wore a bulletproof vest to work. Another had an unprecedented meeting with their sheriff's office to talk about potential threats. I'm curious how these threats impacted your office's efforts to recruit election workers and administer the recent primary elections more broadly, and what you guys are looking to do to tackle these kinds of threats for future elections going forward.
Well, we've had a great working relationship with law enforcement. So our team does have that constant communication. We let them know when our voter service and polling centers are going to open, when election day is, and then when our ballots go out. And that way they can add extra patrols. They can be alert. So if we need to contact them, if there's an issue, they can be there for us. We've implemented that since we've been here in this office. So since 2020. Fortunately, we haven't had too many of those threats here in Mesa County directed towards the election staff, and I'm very thankful for that because that's what's important is staff safety and our judge safety. Another thing, we're fortunate to have election judges that have come back year after year to help us with the process, and they really are passionate about what they do and they care about everything being accurate. And they have come back. The biggest problem what we face this primary election is summer. People taking vacations. So it wasn't as much as the threat for our judges not joining us. It was them taking a vacation. So we're very fortunate in that manner that our judges care about the process and they're willing to be here and help us, even though they're aware that there's that possibility of some unrest.
Interesting. I appreciate that observation. It's important. I mean, I thought the biggest threat that you guys dealt with was the possibility of Pilates classes going on election morning. For those that may not be familiar, allegedly during, I think I'm going to butcher the phrase, but during a Colorado sort of early voting, there were some election officials that came one day to a voting location and discovered a Pilates class going on mistakenly. There were no issues with that, I want to be clear. But this summer thing's actually an interesting phenomenon. I know that when I spoke with my previous guest, when I spoke with Joseph Kirk, Bartow County, Georgia election supervisor for Georgia's primary, that he raised concerns about the date of the primary interrupting with people going on vacation, school graduation ceremonies, and a whole host of other issues, and how that actually was the biggest issue. Interesting to hear you raise that. Is that something, the election date, is this a big enough issue that we could see efforts to try and move the primary date going forward, or was it just this one-time thing for this election?
I think it's an ongoing issue for sure that we see every primary election, but fortunately here in Colorado in a primary, we don't have to have as many voter service and polling centers open for early voting as other states call it. So it limits, or we don't have to have as many election judges hired to help us out. So that helps us in that manner, but it is a problem each election. We have those dedicated folks. They'll call us beforehand, before scheduling their election and say, okay, when's our training going to be? When do we need to work? We're penciling it out. So they're always here for us. When I first started in elections, we had primaries. I want to say they were in August. It was so long ago. But that was really, really hard because you're finishing up your August election. You have your post-election audit that you have to do, so risk limiting audit now, all the cleanup, and it just drags too close to that November election for your UOCAVA ballot mailing and everything like that. So I do appreciate it being moved to June because as far as administration, that helps, but it does, cause that little issue with commitment from folks to help you out.
Okay, and of course, UOCAVA refers, to the uniform and overseas folks who of course, have the opportunity to get their ballot a little further ahead of election than others. one of the things, Brandi, that I want to turn to, is we, of course, have talked about a number of the challenges that you've encountered right out in your role here in Mesa County. And, we could obviously go on and on, whether some of the things we've talked about are obviously the taxpayer money that's gone into addressing some of the previous issues. I think last I saw, it was upwards of over $1 million in response to sort of deal with some of these issues. But I think it's worth talking about the success, and you began to touch on this in the recent primary. And you, of course, talked about your dedicated poll workers, but I think it's also worth talking about the success with regards to the staff. Earlier in the show, we talked about how many new staff there were when you came on. I think it was you and maybe one other colleague that had a lot of experience, perhaps, when you came on board. Obviously, that's changed a bit. And after your staff had a significant workload for the 2021 election, it's my understanding that you were able to provide new staff training and supervision to frankly help ensure the success of the office. So much so that in the run-up to the June primary, right, that you were able to give weekends and evenings to the other staff's families. And for those of us that work in elections, that's by no means a guaranteed thing. And that probably not only kept them in good graces with their family, let's be honest, but might have helped keep them fresh for the upcoming election. Can you tell our listeners more about that success and others that Mesa County achieved during the primary, and how you hope to improve upon those successes or build upon them for future elections?
Yeah, the thing that we work on the most with our team is getting prepared, getting everything done that we can ahead of time completed. So creating your new chain of custodies, creating all your new forms, updating your judges training, getting all that paperwork and documentation and everything done that you can early. And that way you can focus on the big things, because you were in elections, there's always something that comes up that you're not prepared for. So you want to get everything done ahead of time. And people are like, it's 4 months until election. It's okay. We can get this prepared and done. And that way we're ready for the big time that comes up. The staff, we have cross-trained everybody with all of our processes. So right now is our last day to cure. So anybody that was missing a signature on their envelope, signature discrepancy, or didn't provide an ID that were ID required, today's the deadline for them to cure. So all of our team, since it's a little bit quieter today, is in the back, and they're cross-training and learning how you process those through our system. So it just adds to the success of the team, and it makes people more confident in the process and have that ability to explain things to people that question how we do what we do, and give them that confidence in our election department that they have the skills. They can be successful.
No, I appreciate that, Brandi, but I want to just push a little further on this, because I think it's an interesting point. I mean, many folks, of course, speak about cross-training, but as I understand it, you come in May of 2020. A lot of, over half the staff has left. A lot of people that are new. And of course, you're in a situation where you're mindful that the people above you, of course, right, people are changing seats, maybe not being as involved in elections as before. You're dealing with external issues. And then you're having to bring this new staff along. That's perhaps a hill to climb that many election officials, including myself, have not had to deal with on that kind of scale. What things did you do to sort of expedite that process? Because, from where I sit, it looks like it was done pretty quickly. This may be a chance for a humble brag on your end, but I really am interested, because I do think, particularly in light of the threats and the unprecedented exodus we see of election officials and workers, this kind of thing is going to become more and more critical potentially as we go on in terms of election administration.
Yeah, I think it's just important that you work alongside your team. That's what I was taught. You don't ask anybody to do anything you wouldn't do. And to be successful, you need to know how to do all those processes as well. So that's how I worked once I came to Mesa County. Was I worked alongside my team members, and I shared the knowledge and experience that I have had throughout the years. I think it brings a lot of value to the whole process, the more elections that you're able to participate and administer, because not only do you know what works, you know what didn't work. So if somebody brings up an idea to fix something, you can be like, yeah, we've tried that before, not the greatest thing. Another thing that's important with the years of experience that I brought to Mesa County is the past experience with the law. Just knowing those little ins and outs of things, because there's so much that you need to know that it's easy to miss something. So just telling the staff and the team members why we do what we do and why we have all this paperwork. Yes, it seems redundant that we fill out this form and this one seems like it's the same thing. There's 5 different forms, but it helps you create that chain of custody to ensure that everything balances one for one. So just having that background experience and being able to explain why we do what we do help bring the team up to speed quickly. I'm more of a hands-on person, so that's why I worked alongside people, showing them how to work each process, how to run our Agilis machine, how to handle the processes in our tabulation room as well, and making those visits to our voter service and polling centers to help those judges out.
We're going to change gears a little bit and talk now not just about, of course, what happened, but what others perceived happened during the Colorado primary. I know that, as I mentioned earlier, since the 2020 presidential election, many Colorado County clerks, including yourself, have dealt with potential threats, misinformation, harassment. And we know that when people in positions of trust spread false information about election processes close to an election, that combined with that general lack of public understanding about the ways elections work can create this sort of dangerous scenario where voters don't trust the results and, of course, can put American democracy in a precarious spot, right? And, of course, January 6th is perhaps the best example of that. Knowing all of that, and I know you do, what proactive steps did you and your colleagues take to build relationships with others, right? Voters and other external stakeholders to counter anticipated false information ahead of the primary?
We work closely with the Colorado County Clerks Association. It's a great support system. We talk through any questions that arise. That way we're uniform in our answers and we have the accurate information that we're sharing with people. Here in Mesa County, we opened up our office. We did tours. So we had a newcomers group come in and take a tour of the whole process. We started in the front office from voter registration and walk them through each step so they could see how we handle things in the election department. Another way that we help educate is when people come in and they're upset and they don't understand, we take the time to verify their identification and we show them actually in the statewide database, their record, this is what happened on this day by this person. It has a timestamp and we record everything that we do. And it really helps them understand and realize that this misinformation that they are getting is not accurate, and they leave with the confidence and, for the most part, understand what is done and are appreciative of our team and what we do.
And I think Colorado Clerks Association opening the office for the tours and walking through what people do right through your system so that people can see it from beginning to end makes terrific sense. The caveat, the follow-up to that I got to ask in light of the times we live in is for bad faith actors, right? I mean, for those people that may be genuinely curious or they're just sort of anxious because they don't fully know, that's certainly one piece of this. Obviously, there's a different bucket for those that are bad faith. Are there any thoughts that you have for those folks, right, who may potentially, right, be not as persuadable in that respect?
I think a lot is seeing with your own eyes because I can tell people over and over again what our processes are. That's why I invite people into the office and have them sit here. We worked with a group that did some canvassing here in Mesa County, and they were getting information from voters like, I didn't vote, but I have vote credit, or I did vote, but I don't have vote credit. So they brought in their list of that canvas, and I actually was able to sit with the person that brought that up to us and show them in our database with their own eyes, instead of me just as an election administrator saying, no, they have vote credit, they're good. Yeah, oh, nope, they don't. I could physically show them that, and I feel like seeing is more believing than just listening to me tell you.
Seeing is more believing than listening to what I tell you. I like that. So a slogan that I could have used when I was previously an election administrator. I know we've only got a few more minutes. I would love to do this for all day, but I've been told that that's not how these podcast things are supposed to go. So you have to forgive me. You've talked about showing people. For those folks who you're not able to sort of show processes to or bring them in, right? I know this threat of malinformation is a significant one. Are there things that you and your colleagues, right, worked on in the run-up to the primary and are continuing to work on to sort of try and counter those, particularly for those folks who maybe you don't get to handhold in the same kind of way?
So we've worked on voter education. We've really been busy focusing on the process and making sure all our T's are crossed and our I's are dotted. So we didn't get to work as much with voter education as we like to. We have big plans for the future. It's more getting out to the community, going to events, and talking through everything with different groups, because not everybody watches the local news or reads the newspaper or is on our Facebook feed. It's probably just our election judges that follow us, honestly. But just spread the news and educate people is the most important thing. And we just have to find different avenues to reach more people.
No. And to be clear, I know that there was the voter ed. You were probably selling yourself short. I know that when I was curious and taking a look, I saw the information about Democrats, the Democratic ballot, Republicans, the Republican ballot. And unaffiliated, you got to make the choice between the two. So I do know that the proactive effort is certainly there on your end, but I would be interested and excited to see what goes on following the primary and the lead up to the general. As we wrap up, and you sit back, I mean, you have extensive experience in Colorado elections. You obviously have been through an awful lot, particularly since May of 2020. What do you think is the biggest threat to the integrity of U.S. elections, right? Some people tell me election security. Some people tell me false information. Some people tell me voter access, or maybe something else.
I really feel it is the false information. I mean, these people getting fed information that's just not true. And it's really hurting and causing doubt in people's mind. And that's why I said the education piece is so important. And we invite anybody in to come and we'll explain the process. We'll give you a tour. I love it, actually. They regret it when they come talk to me because I can talk all day about it. But I do. I feel that is the biggest threat to us. And as far as access goes, I feel Colorado has a great model. I mean, we send ballots to every eligible elector. So you have that opportunity to vote that ballot, drop it in the mailbox, and get it back to us. Or you can go vote in person. And with same-day registration as well, the access is just, it's there for you. If you choose, you have the opportunity.
Yeah, no, it's important to note that all Colorado voters have a ballot sent to them, but they also have that in-person voting option. It's on election day or even in the run-up to, as well as being able to utilize drop boxes. As you begin, of course, to look toward the November general election, I know, of course, there's still a few lingering things, so you may not have had too much time on this, so I can excuse you, depending on the question. But as you look toward that general election, two very important questions. First, what's the one bagel that you can't live without? After all, this is Ballots and Bagels. And then, because all I do is ask compound questions, which I'm not supposed to for this series, what's the one piece of advice you would give other election officials based on this most recent primary experience?
Well, I think we would all agree the one thing that we can't live without is our team and our judges. Our election judges, we depend on, and we ensure so much trust in them. We give them all this training and we expect them to do things accurately and come back year after year, so they carry that knowledge with them. And our team members, I think it's important to have that strong team that has the longevity. I mean, that brings so much to your processes and procedures and prevent you from having those mistakes happen over and over again. So just having a great team that we have is invaluable. And I forgot what was the other part of the question. Compound question.
Oh, yes, this is the problem with the compound questions. Your favorite bagel, the toughest question of the episode, right?
Like the Asiago cheese ones. Yeah, the cheese bagels are my favorite.
And wait a second, Asiago cheese. See, this is what I'm talking about. I'm very traditionalist in my bagel values. An Asiago cheese bagel, do you put anything on that? Or do you just have it plain?
Just regular cream cheese is good. They have, like, Einstein Bagels has like this honey cream cheese that goes on it. Oh yeah, it's delicious. And you can eat it as for breakfast or you can make it a sandwich. It's great.
All right, well now I've got one more election food fuel to add to the list. Brandi Bantz, thank you for coming on Ballots and Bagels to discuss the Colorado primary. And good luck with your future elections. I'd also like to thank Rachel Dean Wilson, Kayla Goodson, Krisha Sikora, and Hannah Foreman for making this interview possible. Abby Foreman for her branding work, and Zachary Tarrant for his audio and graphics help. Ballots and Bagels, Conversations with Trusted Sources is a production of the Alliance for Securing Democracy. Thanks for listening in. Until next time, keep the faith in U.S. elections.